The driving force behind plentiful passionate artists, the stormy creative fervor of almost indomitable character, channeled and shaped into artistic form with the aim of engaging fully with its witness with strict intent, is revealed in the harassing prose of Guram Rceosvili's short story Alaverdoba. Guram, a young Georgian writer, famous already by the time he met his tragic fate at mere 26 years of age in 1960, after attempting to rescue a Russian girl from drowning in turbulent seas, penned Alaverdoba and a handful of other short stories that immediately caused a stir on 50s Georgian society due to their energetic and defiant spirit, disclosing a vigorous poetic voice and artistic individuality wholly apart from the contemporary discourse, with Alaverdoba having its impact proven by the fact that it is taught in Georgian schools as of today. 2 years after his death, a young aspiring Georgian filmmaker studying under legendary Ukrainian film director Alexander Dovzhenko at the VGIK, who went by the name of Georgi Shengelaya and who would eventually become one of the most significant artists in the country, decided to adapt the work for his graduation project, inspired by his fondness for Guram's literary tales. The outcome, now considered a cinematic landmark in the country and highly revered abroad too, would push Georgian cinema into modernity and become the foundation stone for its remarkable reinvention. Alaverdoba is a 40+ minute student graduation film with all the traits, tricks and aura of a feature film, which is already quite impressive on its own and says as much about the director himself as about the cinematic education standards of the institution and of the period. This, however, did not prevent the film from earning a 5-year ban after its release by the Soviet authorities, who were naturally dissatisfied with the folkloric and religious depictions found in the film, the subtle naturalistic tone, as well as the lack of a clear ideological affinity with the tenets of the Communist Party. From a present-day perspective, however, the film appears rather harmless, notwithstanding its implied push for national identification and reconnection with the past, and therefore one may clearly discern how it came to be viewed as a kind of creative manifesto, the expression of civic position, declaration, impetus for creation and discovery for Georgian directors in the 1960s, as Ella Ochiauri has put it, a Georgian film and theatre critic and professor at the Shota Rustaveli Theatre and Film Georgia State University. But before getting to the role performed by Alaverdoba in history, what is the film all about from a narrative standpoint? As mentioned earlier, the film is effectively an adaptation of Guram Rceosvili's famed short story, and Georgi Shengelaya follows the events and the atmosphere of the work quite faithfully, one which presents a homonymous protagonist, interpreted by Gaidar Palavandishvili, a school friend of Georgi Shengelaya who was married to Guram's sister. Despite his passion being engineering and working as one in an hydroelectric plant, Gaidar reincarnates Guram convincingly and with controlled by the incisive pathos, helped no doubt by the familiarity with the deceased author, and the fact that Gaidar himself corresponded to the Georgian aesthetics for a man of the era, good-looking, athletic and brave, certainly had a positive influence as well. In the film, Guram is an idealistic journalist from Tbilisi working on a newspaper editorial office that receives information about a religious and folk festival in Kakheti, celebrating fertility and with roots in an ancient harvest festival performed in Alaverdi monastery, named Alaverdoba. Among the other reporters, the jocular and skeptic tone predominates and is reflected on their judgment of the event as a fading old custom that has gone out of fashion and lost its meaning throughout the years, and now serves only as an excuse for people to get drunk. Guram, however, is not entirely convinced of that, and decides to see for himself whether these centuries-old Christian Orthodox festivities have really degenerated that badly and become devoid of spiritual purpose during the blatantly atheistic Soviet regime. From the start, one can already sense that there is a clear intention towards an engagement with history and a search for ethnic identity, for authenticity and a spiritual experience intrinsically bound to the nation, and this impression permeates the whole film, as Guram consequently manifests his dismay and disappointment after confirming that the participants of the festival are comprised mostly of drunkards in a binge and tourists with no understanding of the rituals and contexts played therein, despite the infectious dancing of the inebriated revelers. For the sake of context, one ought to know that the festival is still celebrated today, and it used to gather about 15,000 to 20,000 people, bringing together Christians and Muslims, and people from all Caucasia, Kakhetians, Tushetians, Armenians, Ossetians, Tatars, Chechens, uniting all in this site of pilgrimage whose primordial foundation lies in the 6th century, although the currently seen cathedral stems from the 11th century, when it was rebuilt and became the Crypt of Kings. The agricultural fair and traditional bazaar initiated on the second half of the 19th century allowed the various peoples to bring their own cotton, cheese, fabric, weapons, sweets, cattle, and many more produce to be sold for cash or exchanged. It is amidst this setting that Guram finds himself appalled by how the festival goers have forgotten and desecrated the reverence for religious and folkloric traditions as soon as he steps into the cathedral. For a considerable period, Guram wanders through the festival seeking a glimpse of survival of the customs or a spark that could potentially ignite the revival of its spirit, and although at times he appears to be coming close to something akin to it, these illusions are short-lived. Distressed by this failure, he then spontaneously gathers the resolve necessary to disrupt the course of the festival and determines to awaken the numb, intoxicated populace through unconventional and rather reckless means. After stealing a horse from one of the festival goers, he charges back at the festival with it and later even climbs at the top of the cathedral's dome. "I will awaken their relaxed passion for at least a second," says Guram in one of his monologues inside the film, and it's hard not to interpret this thought as an instruction for the young Georgian artistic scene, one which yearned for freedom and a way to express their ideas, love for their culture and admiration for their past, and restrained by the repressive and heavy hand of the Soviet authorities. Andro Boachidze, a renowned Georgian poet, critic and essayist, describes Guram's Akita aspiration as this slightest fantasy already in activity, the movement and revival of the collected, lifeless facts, the intensity of passion that accompanies every construction, the infusion of the soul. The fantasy here is the same imagination that revives a once living but now dead story. It must be mentioned that the scene depicting Guram taking the horse to the distance, far from the festival, and then pulling back into it with full force and speed is utterly electrifying and had been entirely conceived by the director. In its ardent frenzy with a touch of madness, it resembles a surreal cross between the horseback rides of American westerns and the delirious, kaleidoscopic train scene of Mikhail Kalatozov's The Cranes Are Flying. It's an inspirational scene that beautifully portrays the bravery and wealth of spirit required to send a shockwave through a mob, and by extension through an entire country's people. Gaidar Palavandishvili later recalled on an interview how he had trained for a whole year, the length of the film's shooting, with a special teacher to learn how to ride a horse, which he had done only once in his life before production, and attain the trust of the animal and the confidence in himself to push him to the limits. In the same manner, when Guram gets to the monastery dome and draws the attention of the crowd, it's another symbolic awakening directed towards those conformed with their state of slumber. Borrowing the words of Andro Boachidze again, when Guram gets to the dome, he feels eternity. This is a rare moment of harmony. He gains moral height and regains clarity of thought. It is a moment of finding and confirming national energy and vitality, but there is a second one. What is this? It is the anticipation of history to present, and present itself as historical being. Alaverdoba thrives in the idea of direct access to history through creative, perhaps irrational, but nevertheless inspiring means, to question whether the time link has been broken, whether the energy and life force has run out entirely, or whether it is still possible to recapture, to reclaim, and revive the lifeless, aimless corpse present in that time. The parallels with Georgia's then current socio-political situation are notable, and it's in this sense that the film ought to be understood when it is described as the creative manifesto mentioned previously, for the film effectively goes against the people who view or transform the idea into a mere superstition or moral daydream, showcasing them that there is still in their hands the power to not conform, to protest and fight, not only against their oppressors, but against their own anxiety and despair as well, and to successfully overcome it. Although Guram manages to capture the attention of the crowd for very brief moments only, these ephemeral flashes of heightened perception demonstrate the truth and validity of their existence, and from that one learns that they can be used as awakening experiences and as an impulse for a new beginning, for a better tomorrow in the eyes of all. An interesting detail is the fact that one will also find the Alaverdi monastery in later films of Georgi Shengelaia, most noticeably in Pirosmani and The Journey of a Young Composer, demonstrating that the place clearly had special importance for the director. An anecdote describes how in the 40s, Georgi and his brother Eldar, another great Georgian film director on his own, were mesmerized by the droplets of red wine streaming down the windows of the car driven by their father, Nicolas Shengelaia, one of the founders of Georgian cinema, and their mother Nato Vachnadze, the first performing star in Georgian cinema, whilst on their way to Alaverdi, after having stopped in Nato's home and the villagers had set up drinks and food on the car for some merrymaking. Other than being an adaptation of a work that already displayed the comprehension and love for the spirit pervading the monastery and festival, Georgi Shengelaia's overt affection towards the place is most likely one of the reasons why the film comes across as an extremely passionate and caring tribute to Alaverdi. By having also a protagonist that, despite his inexperienced acting career, possessed a deep connection with the author of the original work, having witnessed and recognized how Guram was deeply loved by all those that surrounded him, as well as acknowledging how proud all of his acquaintances were to have met and befriended him, and the respect that the author had earned from both his peers and superiors, most likely played a considerable part in bringing the notable gravitas that exuded from his character. Together with an up-and-coming and already highly talented director of photography, Alexander Rekhviashvili, an artist that fully understood the power of the image in its absolute terms, and one which knew what it takes to assemble an exquisite cinematic aesthetic capable of transcending the mundane portrayal of reality, it is then no surprise that Alaverdoba had left an indelible mark in the hearts and minds of many Georgian viewers, a mark that is still as fresh and vivid today as it was 60 years ago, and hence why the film is considered one of the defining film masterpieces ever created in Georgia. Notwithstanding the fact that several high-ranking communist officials expressed their disapproval towards the scenes portraying the distinctive Georgian peoples in their typical clothing and traditions, with many voicing their desire to cancel the film altogether, but luckily those threats were inconsequential. Still concerning the cinematography of the film, it is indeed an outstanding masterclass by Rekhviashvili, who presents a vast array of techniques and styles, which in its sumptuous ingenuity bring to mind the unforgettable work of Sergei Yuruzevsky in his collaboration with the already mentioned Mikhail Kautazov. As the camera follows Guram in his wandering, soul-searching journey through Alaverdoba, viewers come across various examples of a distinct sensibility towards pictorial composition, framing subjects, objects, spatial surroundings and more broadly the landscape in an organic, effortless and subtle manner that exponentially enhances the experience of the viewer invited to step into the festival with Guram. Moreover, the focus on the widespread dancing spurts and contests allows for a hypnotic camera choreography that also successfully conveys at least partially, perhaps even entirely, the days which the entranced festival dwellers relished and experienced throughout, with many of them being caught in true documentary fashion. Adding the propensity for elaborate and long tracking shots, both with dolly and jib, offers in the end exactly what a cinephile would expect from a mature and creative work of cinema so typical of the genius of the 60s. Even though Rekhviashvili's aesthetic became less expansive, taking pride in a precise and unique minimalistic style as years went by, make sure to check the earlier video presentation of Alexander Rekhviashvili's film career uploaded on this channel if you're interested in his masterful cinematography and significant directorial work. This presentation of Alaverdoba was made possible by the generous help and support of the Georgian National Film Center, having resorted to the most recent high-definition restoration of the film from an original print. The collaboration between the Georgian National Film Center and Plan-Séquence strives to bring Georgian cinema closer to foreign viewers and audiences, so expect more video productions in the future. If you would like to know more about Alaverdoba, Georgi Shengelaia and Georgian cinema, make sure to visit the Institute's website. The Georgian National Film Center, together with the Georgian National Archives, has been in negotiation for several years the return of many works of Georgian film heritage stored in Gosfilmofond in Russia, having already succeeded in many classic films and masterworks. Make sure to watch, discuss and recommend Georgian cinema to your friends and other cinephiles, so that efforts to retrieve, restore and salvage classic Georgian films for posterity may continue. Thank you for listening and see you next time.